welcome back everyone. This will be our last set of video notes for Unit 5, and this one's going to be focusing on all of the processes involved in the carbon cycle. Let's start with a little reminder of what carbon is in general. Carbon's an element with an atomic number of 6, which means it has 6 protons and 6 electrons. Carbon most commonly has 6 neutrons as well, but it can also have 7 or 8 neutrons. Carbon is the most important element for life. Without carbon, there would be no life on Earth, and because of that, we say that life on Earth is carbon-based life form. Carbon is also found in the geosphere, the hydrosphere, and the atmosphere as well. And carbon is in almost everything that we can imagine. Carbon is very, very common on Earth. Next, we'll look at the definition of the carbon cycle. In the carbon cycle, the same carbon atoms are recycled repeatedly on Earth. They cycle between the atmosphere, hydrosphere, geosphere, and biosphere. So the carbon cycle is the recycling of carbon atoms through the atmosphere, hydrosphere, geosphere, and biosphere. On this page, we're going to summarize the main processes involved in the carbon cycle, and then we'll explore each of these processes more in depth later on. We'll start with photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is commonly in plants, but it's in also some types of bacteria and algae. And photosynthesis takes carbon from the atmosphere and it goes to the biosphere. Plants are living things, so photosynthesis is from the atmosphere to the biosphere. And from now on, I'm not going to say takes carbon because we're going to be referring about carbon in all of these things. Consumption is eating. Consumption means to eat. Living things eat other living things. So this is biosphere to the biosphere. It stays within the biosphere. Next is respiration. Respiration is sometimes what we think of as breathing, but respiration actually occurs in all of our cells. But this takes carbon from the biosphere inside of living things and moves that carbon back to the atmosphere. We breathe it out into the air. Next is decomposition. Decomposition is the breaking down of once living things. So this goes from the biosphere, and decomposition can go to the atmosphere. It can go to the geosphere, it can go into the soil, so it can go into the geosphere. And if the living thing dies in water, it can go to the hydrosphere as well. So really this is going from the biosphere to any of the other spheres on Earth. Combustion is burning, and different things can burn. We could burn wood or trees, which would be biosphere. We can also burn rocks, which would be geosphere, so biosphere or geosphere, and not just any rock, but things like coal or fossil fuels, which can be a part of the geosphere. So the biosphere or geosphere, and that will go to the atmosphere. When we burn something, the carbon dioxide releases into the atmosphere. Dissolving is going from the atmosphere to the hydrosphere. So we can dissolve carbon dioxide into water. So we go from the atmosphere to the hydrosphere. And vaporizing is the exact opposite of dissolving. This is when the carbon dioxide in the hydrosphere leaves the water and goes back to the atmosphere. So this is a good page to come back to and reference. If you want to pause it and take a screenshot of this page, it might be helpful. This is a nice summary of where carbon is going from and going to for each of these processes within the carbon cycle. So let's take a look at these processes more in depth now, starting with photosynthesis. So again, photosynthesis mainly takes place in plants, but it can be other bacteria or algae. But plants pull carbon in the form of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere or the hydrosphere to make their food. And what they make is sugar. And this process is called photosynthesis. So photosynthesis is the process of making sugar from carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And there's an equation that shows what this is. We take 6 molecules of carbon dioxide, of CO2, plus 6 molecules of water, H2O, and then plants also need light energy. So they need energy, and they get that in the form of light. So 6 carbon dioxides plus 6 water molecules plus light energy, and they use that to make sugar. This C6H12O6 is sugar, and then as a byproduct they release oxygen gas. They release 6 molecules of that oxygen gas, which is very important for animals like humans. It's also important to note that plants also do cellular respiration. Plants then use that sugar to create a new type of energy source that they need, and we're going to look at respiration in a little bit more detail on the next slide. Animals have 2 important roles within the carbon cycle. The first of those 2 roles is consumption. And this is because, unlike plants, we can't make our own energy source from sunlight and carbon dioxide. Consumers have to eat to gain their energy. So in this process, consumers also take in carbon through the sugar that we eat, or fat, or proteins, or basically any other nutrient that you eat contains carbon. And this whole process is called consumption. So consumption is the first role that animals play, but animals also do cellular respiration. And in this process, all of our cells make carbon dioxide as a waste product. We then transport that carbon dioxide to our lungs, and we breathe that carbon dioxide out into the atmosphere. So consumers release carbon dioxide as CO2 through respiration. And again, you can think of respiration as breathing out, but really each cell does this. We just gather all of the carbon dioxide we make into our lungs to breathe it out. And this is the equation for cellular respiration. We start with sugar, that C6H12O6, again that is sugar. And we use 6 molecules of oxygen. And then using that, we produce 6 molecules of carbon dioxide gas, 6 molecules of water, and we also get energy from this. So this is how we get the energy that we need to survive, by burning sugar within the presence of oxygen. And if you look back at the video, you rewinded a bit to the photosynthesis page, you will notice that the equation for respiration and photosynthesis are identical. They're just reversed. If you were to take this arrow going to the right here and then move it to the left instead, that is photosynthesis. Respiration and photosynthesis are very similar. They're just reversals of that process. So again, main points from this slide: animals eat carbon in the form of sugar, fat, or proteins, and then animals also breathe out carbon into the atmosphere through respiration. All life forms on Earth eventually die, and once they do die, decomposition is going to start. So when plants and animals die, decomposers return their carbon to the atmosphere. They can release it into the air, they can release it into the soil or the geosphere, or they can release it into water, which is the hydrosphere. So decomposition can go to any of the other spheres. And then sometimes, if the animal or plant is not fully decomposed, so if it's not fully decomposed, sorry about that, they can lose their carbon into the geosphere with soil and rocks. And really what we're thinking of here is it's is it's not just the carbon that becomes the rock, but the whole life form itself becomes a rock. And we can think of this as a fossil for animals, and we sometimes call that petrified wood for plants. So fossils and petrified wood are examples of where the thing itself has become rock based. Fossils are essentially rocks. The next process that we'll explore is combustion. And combustion is a really fancy way of saying burning. So we can burn carbon sources because they're very high in energy. Forest fires are natural ways that the carbon in plants is released as CO2 into the atmosphere. So when there is a forest fire, whenever those plants burn, all of the carbon within them combines with the oxygen in the air, and we get carbon dioxide that's released into the atmosphere. Humans also contribute to combustion through the burning of fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are things like coal, natural gas, petroleum, gasoline in cars. And the same thing from a fire. Anytime we burn these fossil fuels, it releases carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And currently, more carbon dioxide, more CO2, is being released into the atmosphere than should be naturally occurring, and we'll look at the effects of that in just a second. Then finally, for the processes, we have dissolving and vaporizing. And this has to do with oceans because oceans store huge amounts of carbon, often in the form of carbon dioxide, but animals can do something cool with this carbon as well. So oceans store large amounts of carbon. CO2 is dissolved in the water and is vaporized back into the atmosphere. Now, when there's carbon dioxide in water, it can react with some calcium to form calcium carbonate. And that is what is highlighted down here. And calcium carbonate is very, very important because it's what animals use to make shells in the ocean. So anything that has a shell in the ocean, that is usually made of calcium carbonate. So interestingly, when ocean life that has shells dies, those shells don't just disappear or decompose. They sink to the ocean floor and they become sedimentary rocks. So this is how we get things like limestone and chalk. This is actually rock that was made from once living things, which is why it's biochemical rock. So here we're going to look a little bit more about the effects of releasing too much carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And really, it's creating an unbalanced carbon cycle. The amount of carbon in the atmosphere is increasing, and we're seeing a decrease of carbon in the biosphere and geosphere, mostly through things like deforestation and combustion. So we no longer have a balanced carbon cycle, because currently more carbon dioxide is being released into the atmosphere than is being pulled from the atmosphere. So plants are usually the main thing that is pulling carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And as CO2 is a greenhouse gas, this is an important term, greenhouse gases prevent heat energy from escaping the Earth's atmosphere. So if that heat energy can't escape, the Earth will continue to warm. So as CO2 is a greenhouse gas, it is contributing to the increase in average global temperatures. And unfortunately, humans are major contributors to the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere due to our burning of those fossil fuels. Again, this process is combustion. Unfortunately, we have a double whammy as humans because not only are we burning fossil fuels, which increases carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, we are also doing a lot of deforestation or cutting down of forests. And this decreases photosynthesis. And that matters because photosynthesis pulls carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. So if we're not pulling that carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere as much, the atmospheric carbon dioxide also increases as well. I'm going to end these notes by showing you a picture of a lot of the carbon cycle processes in one place. This isn't perfect This picture does not show consumption. There's no animals eating any plants or eating other animals in here. And then for the ocean, it doesn't label it as dissolving or vaporizing. It just talks about how oceans are storage places for carbon dioxide, and then they can also release that carbon dioxide with this air and sea gas in exchange that's taking place over here. My challenge for you would be to draw a diagram in your notebook or on a separate piece of paper that you could add to your notebook, um, that would have all of the processes that we discussed in our notebook. So you would have respiration and photosynthesis and consumption and decomposition. If you can add all of those things in a single diagram, especially without referencing your notes, you probably have a pretty good grasp of the carbon cycle. If you feel like your grasp of the carbon cycle is not there yet, we have a few other activities in this unit that will help you get there. And again, you can always ask Mr. Tanner or rewatch the notes if you have any questions. But that's going to be it for me. See you guys.